Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But that seems to be significant, and the reason why I say seems to be significant is that it probably isn't. But it should be. Like almost everything else that's happened since this general election was called. Moments almost uncountable, which would have done for any previous candidate, have not done for Boris Johnson. He continues to evade proper scrutiny, in this case by ITV's Julie Etchingham and the BBC's Andrew Neil, and according to a comment from a senior Conservative source that's just dropped, he won't be doing them. They're trying to claim that the public have had enough of seeing big set-piece interviews with senior politicians. Which is not true, obviously, but that doesn't matter, does it? Not in this political climate. It's saying something categorically untrue, demonstrably untrue, but it doesn't matter because ... Even I'm getting tired of pointing out how stupid it is to base your opinions on everything by the colour of the political scarf you've got around your neck, and that scarf is defined almost exclusively by Brexit, not by old party loyalties, but by whether you are still labouring under the tragic illusion that leaving the European Union could deliver anything beneficial or good or simply better than what we currently have for the United Kingdom, or you remain welded to the notion that it can't. And that's why I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's intervention will make much difference. You've got to be very careful when you do this for a living. You don't want to talk yourself into redundancy, either actual redundancy or merely metaphysical redundancy, by suggesting that it doesn't matter what we do or what the news contains or what we say or what we hear or what we find or what we read. Everyone is so rooted in their position that the notion of information tipping the scales in either direction or any direction is laughable. It obviously isn't, but the number of people who are movable is the great unknown of all electoral arithmetic, isn't it? It's why we attach arguably far too much weight to opinion polls in this country at this time, because most people seem to be welded to a given position, and it's impossible to count the number of people who are essentially up for grabs. I mean, it's almost impossible, isn't it, to imagine a voter torn between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson for a whole heap of reasons. It's almost impossible to imagine that. If you are that voter, in many ways, I'd like you to come in and present the programme, actually, because you'd be absolutely fascinating in so many ways. But I have before me, I feel like Neville Chamberlain, I have in my hand a piece of paper, several pieces of paper, under the heading, Her Majesty's Treasury, Northern Ireland Protocol, Unfettered Access to the UKIM. The new Northern Ireland Protocol maintains the UK's commitment to protecting the UK internal market, that's what UKIM means, by ensuring that Northern Ireland goods have unfettered access to GB. However, this is constrained by the international obligations applying to Northern Ireland by application of EU law. At minimum, this means that exit summary declarations will be required when goods are exported from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So, I mean, I'm going to pretend that it matters to you. Possibly it does. But if this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back with Boris Johnson's utter dishonesty, then, I mean, how come you didn't notice all the other straws even? So Boris Johnson continues to insist, and has repeatedly insisted, despite all evidence to the contrary, and indeed the expert opinions of people in his own government, that there would be no customs checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. This report, published by his own Treasury, not intended for wider publication, but secured somehow by Jeremy Corbyn's team. This report categorically renders Boris Johnson wrong. Possibly dishonest, we'll never know. You'd have to find his conscience and examine it to have a view on that. But he is categorically wrong when he makes that claim, when he continues to make that claim. It's incredibly generous, perhaps, to him to suggest that he might have made an honest mistake. I'm prepared to leave that possibility out there, hanging out there. But it seems to me fairly generous to make that argument, not least because he is currently the Prime Minister of these islands, and therefore in receipt of all available information denied to lesser mortals such as you and me. The other weird thing about this job is coming on air, and I don't do this every day, but some days I do find myself thinking, are we doing what they actually want us to do? I don't know how much time you spend on social media, but there's a suggestion now that when you retweet something you disapprove of, you're falling into a trap set by the people who've done the thing that you disapprove of. So if I were to retweet a Conservative Party campaign video or a Labour Party campaign video in a mocking way, the suggestion is, and I don't know who's right and who's wrong on this, that you are actually doing their work for them, if you have a big following, by disseminating. So imagine if my Twitter following is, I don't know what it is these days, about 500,000. So presumably it's more than most politicians. So if I retweet them taking the mickey, they get to hundreds of thousands of screens that they wouldn't otherwise have got to, even though I'm taking the mickey. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, anyway. We all got our crosses to bear. And that means that some mornings you sit here and you think, oh, Lordy. I saw Dan Hodges, a journalist I quite like. As a person, I like him a lot. As a journalist, I quite like him. And he suggested that it's what Boris Johnson would want today is for us all to be talking about his refusal to be interviewed by Andrew Neil at the BBC or Julie Etchingham at ITV. And I mean, maybe it is. Maybe I am falling into a trap. But you'll go mad if you start thinking like this. I'd quite like to talk about Jeremy Clarkson abusing Greta Thunberg and ask you the question of what it is about this rather magnificent young woman that upsets so many ignorant old men. It's a very strange dynamic. But Jeremy Clarkson made his comments, his abusive comments regarding Greta Thunberg, while promoting a new television show. And of course, because he's not on the Beeb anymore, he doesn't get the publicity or the coverage. I'm sure it doesn't keep him awake at night, given what he gets paid by Amazon. But he is not desperate, he is clearly promoting a product, and getting his face in the papers and getting talked about on telly and radio is part of that promotion project. So do we end up, even though we would mostly be disapproving of him abusing a 16-year-old girl in that way, do we end up doing his job for him? Are we promoting his new show simply by talking about it? I do not know. I do not know. And I can't come on air every single morning and just ask you why everything has gone so crazy. Can I? 0345 6060 973. So, what I want to do is phrase this question carefully, because I'm not sure that. And we'll focus on Boris Johnson, former editor of The Spectator, being interviewed on the BBC by Andrew Neil, chairman of the company that publishes The Spectator. And the question has to be right, which is this. I don't think, whether he did it or not, anything would change. And I don't understand why. There's another story in the news today, which, I mean, you can snigger, actually. I'll be comfortable being sniggered at over this one, but I don't think you should. Because when I tell you the source, perhaps you'd change your attitude. I believe that the denigration of objective truth, at best encompassed in that phrase, beloved of Donald Trump, fake news, I believe it is Russian in origin. I believe that the bombardment via social media of Western citizens, Brits and Americans in particular, with things that are categorically untrue, particularly with regard to the Brexit referendum and the last American presidential campaign, is simply designed to destabilise us on a scale that I think you'd have to be very, very rose-tinted not to conclude it's working. And now you can say, oh, shut up, James, with your Russian business. But this is the claim today of the Chief of the Defence Staff. Just let that sink in for a minute. General Sir Nick Carter has said that Moscow is using fake news as a form of warfare, and the army itself must adapt to tackle it. Wow. They are using fake news to undermine cohesion, erode economic, political and social resilience, and challenge our strategic position in key regions. You can't not bring Brexit into this, and it leads us back to the document that Jeremy Corbyn has just unveiled, which clearly describes in black and white how leaving the European Union, or the UK's Brexit, would render Northern Ireland, well, literally, it would erode economic, political and social resilience in Northern Ireland. Brexit will, according to the Treasury's own report. And the head of the army is saying fake news is a Russian weapon being used to destabilise and undermine the West. And still it doesn't matter, because you've got your team. You've got your scarf around your neck, and you don't care. And that is the question that runs through every hour we spent together like Blackpool through a stick of rock. How did it come to this? So, I can't sit here and say, give me a ring and tell me that you don't care about anything. 0345 6060 973. I can't sit here and say, here you go, conclusive proof that Boris Johnson has been lying about Brexit. Because, I mean, that's been true for 3.5 years, arguably. I can't sit here and say Jeremy Corbyn has landed a massive punch on Boris Johnson because, well, if you land a punch on somebody and there's nobody there to see it, it's like the tree falling down in the woods, isn't it? Has it actually happened? So here's the question for you. How have we ended up with a Prime Minister who is demonstrably and categorically wrong on an almost unprecedented scale when it comes to his own public pronouncements? And this isn't a matter of opinion. This is, today, something proved by a publication from his own Treasury. And I don't think, even if he was debagged live on television by Julie Etchingham and Andrew Neil, I don't think it would change anything. It might make you less likely to vote for him, but then I think you'd just stay at home and not vote at all. And I don't get it. It's almost as if politics and political journalism are like a dog chasing its own tail, while the rest of the public feels increasingly alienated. Which leaves me sounding a little bit like the senior Conservative source this morning who said Boris Johnson won't be doing the Andrew Neil interview because the public are tired of these set-piece interviews with constant interruptions and a kind of hinting at the notion that it's all about the presenter's ego rather than the public's chance to actually let the dog see the rabbit. Wow. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Let's start with that. Simple question. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm right? That if Boris Johnson did this interview and immolated live on air, if his arm fell off, if it went more wrong than the wrongest thing in the history of wrong things, it still wouldn't change anything. So the calculation not to do it, we're getting our knickers in a twist about it. But actually, so what? Corbyn did it. Has it changed anything? Are you now likely to vote for Corbyn when 2 weeks ago you would rather have chewed off your own fingers? It just doesn't seem to be, to me, a country in which there's any connection at all between politics and reality. And that's a little bit scary. Trying to allay my fears in all the usual ways. 0345 6060 973. And I know I haven't exactly asked you a clear, concise and cogent question, but don't let that hold you back. It never stops me. Here's the claim that senior Conservative source has told BuzzFeed News. The public are fed up with interviews that are all about the interviewer and endless interruptions. The format is tired and broken and needs to change if it is to start engaging and informing the public again. That's absolute Horlicks. It's complete and utter nonsense. I think they got over 3 million viewers for the Jeremy Corbyn interview, which in that space at this time in the current market is a magnificent figure. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because this is Trumpian. This is, very simply, bypassing of being asked questions because you know the candidate is not honest. So what's the point of doing interviews? All you will do is assemble more evidence that the candidate is not honest. And his voters already don't care. If you voted for Brexit, you voted already for things that have turned out not to be true. You voted for people who have been not held to account for breaking rules, breaking electoral law, breaking spending guidelines, and breaking millions of promises. You've already done that. And if you're still wearing that scarf, what difference will more evidence of dishonesty and unaccountability make to you? So, because this is the Brexit election, whether you like it or not, what this suggests, this claim from a senior Conservative source, is that they're going to try to win it by using the same tactics that won Brexit. Unaccountability and demonstrable dishonesty. Because it's not about facts, it's not about evidence, it's not about knowledge, it's about feelings and it's about emotions and it's about stoking fears, I think. But I could be wrong. Keith's in Shoreditch. Keith, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, isn't it about the relentless attacks, mainly by the print media, that you see subliminally. You walk into that shop and you see the headlines, or you walk into a garage, you see the headlines. And if 60% of our print media owned by Murdoch and the Daily Mail Group were relentlessly attacking him.
Don't forget the Barclay brothers.
Sorry?
Don't forget the Barclay brothers over at the Telegraph and the Spectator.
You know, that relentless day-by-day attack.
But that's not new, Keith. That's been around since the 70s.
Yeah, but it's not done against Boris, is it?
But it never is done against Conservatives. It's nothing new. I mean, John Major used to get a little bit of jip from Kelvin Mackenzie over at The Sun, but Margaret Thatcher didn't, so it's not new.
But it was only when Blair was, you know, taken under Murdoch's wing that we ended up with Labour, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing the biases of the print media, nor do the print media, for that matter. They wear their biases and their supposed preferences on their sleeves, but I don't see it as anything. I'm not hearing anything new. I'm not hearing anything specific to this era, and this era feels very different from all the other eras. And if it is very different from all the other eras, the reason can't be something that's been present in all the other eras as well. Something different is happening. Something new is afoot, isn't it?
The only other thing I can think is it people's only hope, because that's what politicians, you know, that's what they rely on. They rely on hope, and the hope is that everything's going to get better after Brexit. And people have just got it so ingrained now. Yes,
except we know it isn't. You know, we as the kind of objective arbiters of evidence-based observation, and you can say, oh, don't be such a Ramona. I say, no. I'm just reading the Treasury's own report on how bad things are going to get in Northern Ireland under the terms of the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson has negotiated, and is still trying to sell us some sort of triumph. So here's the evidence that things are going to get worse. People might hope that they're going to get better, but the government that's telling you they're going to get better is circulating internal reports describing how it's all going to get worse. We're down the rabbit hole, man.
All we need, journalists, to be journalists and for truth. That's all we need.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You make more money, you get more gigs telling untruths. You know, what are the biggest jobs in British journalism? Editing The Sun, editing The Telegraph, editing The Mail?
They shouldn't be the biggest job in journalism.
No, but they are, and it's not new, Keith. I'm going to crack on. I think the media has obviously got something to blame, and it does feel, particularly over at the Telegraph, that standards have reached new lows, but they're no lower than they were under Kelvin Mackenzie at The Sun. They're just now in a broadsheet, as opposed to being merely in a tabloid. 10:24 is the time. There you go. Finally, after 24 minutes on air, got to the question, how do we get out of this rabbit hole, my dudes? Richard is in Anglesey. Richard, what would you like to say?
I'm just responding really to the thing about Boris Johnson ducking the Andrew Neil interview, really.
Yes. And the Julie Etchingham one as well, while we're at it. And the James O'Brien one. And the James O'Brien one. That's the biggie. That's the one everyone should be talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. What I'd say is that, you know, regardless of whether they did it or not, I don't think it would make a blind bit of difference.
Nor do I.
Two reasons for saying that is that every time he opens his mouth, he never answers a question, and then he just reels off the same old rubbish about the 40 hospitals, the money for schools, blah, blah, blah. It's just the same old rubbish, and it's been debunked. We all know it's not true, and I'm just, you know, I'm sick of it. And secondly, the reason I'm saying it doesn't make a difference.
But you're sick of it. You're not going to be more sick of it or less sick of it after he's done the interview. And the people that aren't sick of it aren't going to suddenly become sick of it because they've been swallowing it for 3.5 years.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. But another reason I'd say that I wouldn't make much difference is, you know, if you put it down to a local level, and we've had...
I don't want you to put it... No, you can't do anything down to a local level. You'll get me into trouble with Ofcom. That's pretty much the only bit about the guidelines that I understand. If in doubt, drown him out. So how do we get out of the rabbit hole? Because Brexit has put us in the rabbit hole. Brexit is born of and built on things that aren't true. And so how do we undo the mess of British politics until or unless we kind of retrospectively admit that Brexit's all bollocks?
Well, like that's exactly where I'm at, is that I'm you may have guessed, an ardent Remainer.
Yes.
But myself, my wife, my two grown-up sons, you know, we've all sort of resigned almost that it's going to happen.
Yes.
We desperately don't want it to happen, but we resigned, thankfully.
But that's generations.
My children have got Irish passports. So
that's same here. We're on the case with that as well. But that's generations ahead, and the people who need to admit that they lied to the British public are now running the country.
Yeah, and that's frightening.
And half of the people listening to this programme, 52% of them, who knows, will somehow not be seeing the reality that we're describing. They'll be seeing something else. Shut up, you're so biased. To stop picking on Boris. Jeremy Corbyn's the one that won't come on this radio station, don't forget. Boris Johnson's just ducking Andrew Neil and Julie Etchingham. He came on here. Jeremy Corbyn won't come on with anyone, as far as we can tell. 27 minutes after 10. But Jeremy Corbyn is not Prime Minister, and he is not today facing stone-cold evidence that he's lied or been profoundly wrong on the issue of border checks in the Irish Sea. I mean, that's huge. It doesn't matter anymore. Just get it done. Get what done? That massive lie. Jan's in Oxshott. Jan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. But I think what people are worried about, I think, is that it's not that people like Boris or trust him or believe him or any of those things. I just think that people are so worried about Jeremy Corbyn and the kind of socialism that he represents that they're willing to just forgive or ignore, maybe not forgive, but temporarily ignore everything that's been going on, and everything is just white noise, and it's just like, well, it's just noise, it's just Boris, and we'll just have to deal with it now.
It's not. I mean, look, the demonisation of Corbyn is a matter of recorded fact. Whether it's deserved or not is a matter of opinion, but it's not new. I'd cite the example of Ed Miliband's dead dad. You know, what the Daily Mail under Paul Dacre did to Ed Miliband's late father was utterly reprehensible, and for my money, worse than anything that has actually been done to Corbyn. So the fear of Corbyn getting in will explain some of what's going on, but it wouldn't explain previously rational actors voting for lies, would it?
No, but I think you underestimate the people's. It's not Corbyn himself as a person. Like, replace Corbyn with McDonald. It's what the politics represent. It's not just normally when you vote in an election, it doesn't really matter who you vote for. It's two kinds of thoughts. So okay, Tony Blair, John Major, they're more or less the same. Okay. Yes, one had hope and it had some vision, but essentially they're the same kind of free market capitalism with the necessary taxation to pay for social services and borrowing. But when you have somebody who represents something that is, you know, for a lot of people is scary, or maybe harks back to the past, or they're worried about confiscation of property, worried about paying tax twice for wealth taxes.
Yeah, but they didn't. They do, and there's a lot of people perhaps fearful of a financial hit. But I guess I'd come back by saying they didn't worry about Jeremy Corbyn. They didn't tell lies during the Brexit referendum because they were worried about Jeremy Corbyn's tax policies.
No, that's I'm talking about now.
I know you are, but I'm tracing it back to there. And if your analysis was correct, it would have to accommodate the weaponising of deceit, the lie on the side of the bus, the ludicrous claims that have all fallen apart. And yet here we are insisting that we somehow have to get it done. I don't think you can unhook the two. But then, you know, I have my own biases and my own preconceptions as well. Here's an interesting observation, which I hope you'll enjoy. Owen Jones has just made it on Twitter, but it refers to the fact that John Major, you remember him, he was a Prime Minister and, of course, a Conservative. He still is. But the latter qualification does not prevent him from joining an election rally later today in which he will call for Boris Johnson not to win a majority. He doesn't want Boris Johnson to win a majority. And the point Owen makes is, do you remember Ian Austin, a former Labour MP who urged people not to vote for Jeremy Corbyn? And do you remember the news coverage that got? Yeah, funny, isn't it? A former Conservative Prime Minister urging people not to deliver a majority to the Conservative Party. Here is the full extent of the media coverage for that. Some bloke called Ian, who used to be a Labour MP, tells people not to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, and the world literally goes mad. Now, make sense of that. You know me, I don't have a dog in this race, but I think you've got to treat people equally or according to status. You know, if it's about a political intervention, then the idea that a prime minister who doesn't want his own party to win is less interesting, less important, less newsworthy than a backbench non-entity who doesn't want his party to win is actually incredible. But let me show you how it works, because I'm delighted to tell you that I've heard for the first time in my life, I think, from someone who describes himself as a PE consultant. Wow. A chap called Ashley Stevenson Lee, who's tweeted to say, hearing at Mr. James O.B. hopelessly waffle about conspiracies is making me excited for December the 13th. So what we're talking about today is a Her Majesty's Treasury report which categorically states that there will be customs checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It categorically states. Here's Boris Johnson just, what, about 3 weeks ago? About a month ago, was it? Beginning in November, beginning of last month.
But so when you come out of the EU customs union, which is what we've done, you have to have some way of checking that goods that might attract a tariff going from the United Kingdom into Ireland pay that tariff if there is to be a tariff. The only place you can do it, if you don't do it at the border, is at the border in Northern Ireland. So actually Northern Ireland has got a great deal. It's got a great deal. You keep free movement, you keep access to the single market, but you also have, as it says in the deal, unfettered access to GB. And so we can also come out and do free trade. So the only reason they gave us that deal, by the way, was because they were, at the back of their minds, they were still worried that we would come out without a deal.
Unfettered access, he said, at the beginning of November. HM Treasury states categorically that it won't be unfettered. Far from it. And yet, our friend, the primary PE consultant, somehow thinks that this is something to celebrate. Why? Because those of us who don't like liars are getting very upset about the primacy of liars. And that means that people who do like liars think they've somehow got something to celebrate. Because they either lack the wit or they don't care about the simple, inalienable fact that they don't just lie to their enemies, they lie to their fans as well. How do we get out of the rabbit hole? James is in Petersfield. James, what do you reckon?
Well, I'm not a 100% expert on politics, but I listen to it a lot.
James. Nobody is.
I listen to your show a lot as well. And what I personally believe, and this sits well in my gut rather than just an off-the-cuff feeling,
all right,
is that the public no longer care. It was all introduced by Donald Trump. He has just been throwing mistruths and lies into the public arena on a daily basis. The headlines have been crammed. The press cannot keep up. Nothing seems to undermine him. And I personally believe that Johnson has just followed the model of Trump. And he's come in and they just ram the headlines. I mean, I get a little bit upset with politics because I see the corruption and I see the unfairness of the reporting. And I just turn off for 24 hours, and then I come back and, I'm hit with all these sort of rampant headlines that, and I'm wondering how I could have missed all of this. There's so much going on all of the time. I think the public are worn out with politics. They've given up with politics, and they're going. But
in many ways, they're more
feeling.
passionate than ever before. I mean, tribal is perhaps an overused word now, but people think they care more about politics than ever before, and yet it's not politics that they care about, it's something else.
But I think it's the majority of people on the street are no longer tuned into politics. They're tuned into their everyday lives, and they try and turn away. They're sick
Their
and tired of
Facebook
Brexit.
feeds are full of stuff about immigrants and the lies about the Lisbon Treaty, and they genuinely, I think. I mean, you might be right. I don't know. Neither of us can prove it one way or the other. But I don't think we're looking at an unengaged electorate. We're simply looking at an electorate that is unprecedentedly engaged with things that are simply not real.
Well, I'm not sure you're right there,
I hope
James.
I'm not, mate. I hope I'm not, James.
I think the people that are actually engaged into politics don't represent the majority of the people out there. I think a good 70% of the public of this country.
Okay, we're both right. We're both right, because actually people are defining themselves according to how they voted in the referendum. So you might be right about all the other stuff, but you're saying nothing matters, and I'm saying only that matters.
Oh, no, I agree. The Brexit matters, and that's what they're voting with right now. But I think people have turned off right now towards electric, and the people who are posting on Facebook, the people who are running the news, etc., they have got a loud voice, but but most of the people are just worn out. And the lies that, let's say, Boris Johnson are putting out, it doesn't matter because everyone's turned off. People just are not listening, they're worn out with it, and they're worn down. And they just don't believe anymore. Nobody believes. It's really unfortunate.
And how do we get out of the rabbit hole without something significant happening with regard to Brexit? I mean, I don't want to be depressing, but I can't see how you do this. How do you undo the damage done by a nationwide con job?
Absolutely. The unfortunate thing is I think we need politicians with a greater integrity.
Oh, and don't hold your breath. And there are politicians with integrity, but they're not household names, generally speaking.
But I mean, I don't belong to any political party, but I think Swinson and I think Jeremy Corbyn have got far greater integrity. And they're people that I would put trust in as opposed to Johnson. I wouldn't trust him to mow my lawn.
Is Corbyn in favour or opposed to European Union membership?
Well, he's neutral, as we know.
No, he's not.
And this is his big problem, and this is the reason why I don't believe he will ever get into power. Because
I'm not necessarily suggesting that undermines your claims about integrity. I'll just leave it out there. 10:43 is the time. Got there in the end. I don't think the public are unengaged. I just think they define everything. We now see everything through the lens of Remain or Leave, and I'm guilty of that myself. But for me and this side of the argument, it is about a fairly powerful case for believing that we're going to do unnecessary harm to our country. Don't take my word for it. Here is an HM Treasury report from Boris Johnson's own government, making precisely that case with reference to Northern Ireland. How do you balance that in classic BBC equivalence style? How do you balance that? Here's an HM Treasury report saying that Northern Ireland is going to be battered by Brexit under the terms of Boris Johnson's so-called deal, and that we are going to have customs checks in both directions. How do you balance that out? Here's some bloke with a blog who doesn't think it's true. Here is the Treasury saying it is true. Here is the Prime Minister saying it is not true. So pick a side, right? Depending on what you already believe, regardless of the facts and the evidence. Here is a Treasury report circulated throughout Boris Johnson's government, detailing, explaining and cataloguing things that are true. Here's Boris Johnson saying the polar opposite. Just pick a side. Pick a side. It's all the same. All's fair in love and war. That's where we are. I think we're there because of Brexit. I think Donald Trump, actually, is probably where he is today in a way because of Brexit. I know that sounds funny, but don't forget what a big deal he made about it at the time. Because, of course, if you can get that electoral result over the line, if you can get that vote over the line on the back of lies and exaggerations and people believing alternative facts as opposed to actual facts, once it was shown that it could be done, Donald Trump no doubt thought, well, we can do it too. So how do you get out of this rabbit hole? And how do we stay friends if you're still down it? How do we stay friends if you're still sitting there thinking thoughts like our friend, the PE consultant? How do you do it? You know, oh, it's great. Look how upset everyone's getting about all the lies that we are being told. Yeah, but you're being told them as well. Yeah, I know, but I'm on the same team as the liars. Are you? Are you really? How come he won't do an interview where the interviewer has made it clear that he wants to focus on the issue of trust? He doesn't need to, because mugs like you already trust him. Would be one calculation. You might have another. So the world divides on a day like today, or at least the country does, into people who already knew that there were going to be customs checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Customs declarations, GB to NI, customs declarations, NI to GB, rules of origin for GB to NI, regulatory checks for GB to NI. Still only potentially, because, of course, if we were to adopt full regulatory alignment with the European Union, if the whole of the United Kingdom were to remain aligned with the European Union, then you wouldn't need any of these things. So, you know, get it done doesn't even begin to answer that question yet. But as it stands, every trade expert in the world has explained why there would have to be checks in the Irish Sea. Boris Johnson and Theresa May both, of course, argued that that would be utterly, utterly inconceivable for any British Prime Minister to agree to. Boris Johnson then agreed to it. So that's half the world. The other half of the world presumably still think it's not true because Boris Johnson said so. It's quite bizarre. Then the political editor of the BBC, Laura Kunsberg, who, for the record, I rather admire, here, unless I'm missing something, she has. Expect Corbyn will try to use this at the debate tonight to suggest Johnson is misleading people about his deal. Worth reading this from, and then the Northern Ireland economics and business editor, a chap called Campbell, who's a really good journalist, debunked Johnson's claims on what the deal does and doesn't do a while ago. And yet surely the story is that Johnson is still claiming stuff that's not true. So to say this isn't really a story because everybody knew it already, while the Prime Minister is denying it, I'm afraid this is one of the moments at which I'm tempted to hang up my headphones and take up, I don't know, I might become a lounge singer. No? Oh, all right. See if I can get a game for Kidderminster Harriers. I could be like Michael Gove, just turn up with my boots and demand one. I don't get it. I don't get that. How can it be? So expect Corbyn will try to use this at the debate tonight. If you're having a debate with Boris Johnson and Boris Johnson is saying things that are contradicted by his own Treasury report, you wouldn't be using it. You'd be blinking, but does it matter? I mean, I know that we're probably not going to be swapping Christmas cards, but if I've just described you, if you know it's almost certainly not true, but you still kind of believe it because Boris keeps telling you it is true, give us a ring, eh? On 0345 606 0973. No mistletoe, just a quick chat. How's that playing out? We've got our friend the PE consultant who somehow derives pleasure from being lied to and pleasure from the frustration of those of us who hate liars. And yet, there we are. Just check your scarf. Give me a ring. 0345 606 0973. Duncan is in Cobham. Duncan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Just that the answer to your question is no. It wouldn't matter if he went on to Andrew Neil or if a rubber duck went on to Andrew Neil anymore.
I fear you're right. I wish you weren't.
The lies have just ground everyone down to the extent that the Tory party is arrogant enough.
Not everyone, Duncan, because plenty of people are still cheering them. Or believing them, or pretending to believe them. I don't know what words to use anymore, which is a bit of an occupational hazard for me.
But primarily because his only message now is get Brexit done. He's successfully uncoupled that message from all the lies that got him there in the first place. I mean, it's just the last week before the election, I think they'll just keep him under wraps so he doesn't implode. But I think even if he imploded, it wouldn't matter anymore.
He could turn up in his pants. And it wouldn't lose a single vote. Is this the British equivalent of? Go on.
As long as the Spitfires are still flying over the White Cliffs, he will be saying, "Get Brexit done," and people will still believe it, and they don't care what he's saying, how he says it. They don't even care about what the details of what will happen to this country after Brexit. It's become so tribal and depressing that I think I'm going to go and jump off a bridge.
Well, no one would want you to do that, Duncan. I appreciate that's only a figure of speech.
There'll be a small bridge. a foot bridge.
Yes. But it's not... I mean, I can't think of much I would dispute in what you've said, except the failure that we have, all of us who are likely to ring in today, in understanding the mindset of the people who are not going to ring in today, who are still somehow buying it on a scale that is now... I mean, I genuinely have to pinch myself.
Dominic Cummings has done an excellent job. He's kept Rees Mogg out of things. He's kept Boris Johnson out of things other than shaking hands with nurses and so on. He doesn't put him. He doesn't allow Johnson to get into a position where his lies can be countered. I mean, but even if they were. I don't think people are listening anymore. I think
you're clearly right. Here is the Treasury, right? High negative impact on the Northern Irish economy due to friction on imports and exports as a result of Johnson's deal with the EU. Here's Boris Johnson at the beginning of November saying it would be frictionless. Just pick. You can choose what you believe, you see.
Yeah, and the point is, James, it doesn't matter. No one cares. No one cares.
Well,
no
not
one on
enough
that
people
side
care.
cares.
No, don't give up.
You know,
Seriously, when none of us will give up. Even in, whatever happens, you still have to care. There is truth and there is untruth, and if you can hang on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad or jump off any footbridges. Trust me, that's George Orwell. There it is. You don't choose what you believe. I can't choose what I believe. I can only believe what is true. It is true that the Treasury has said that the Northern Irish economy will suffer a high negative impact and there will be friction on imports and exports. That's true. The Treasury has said it. Boris Johnson has said the polar opposite. That's not true. There are no facts to support Boris Johnson's claims. But people will choose to believe it nonetheless. Why? Well, because Brexit. Obvs. Andy's in the Wirral. Andy, what do you reckon?
Hi, I think you're asking the question about rabbit holes, but what about echo chambers and what the internet creates and how Facebook works?
I don't know enough about it because of what I do for a living. I couldn't be less echo chambery in my life, in my working life.
I've been on the internet since about 1996.
Yeah.
Because it was a particular interest of mine. I'm a senior web developer, so it's like my business. It's what I do. And back then, there was, we had MySpace, and MySpace was just kind of it was an impression of what you were involved in. There was no algorithms kind of showing you things that it thought you wanted to see or anything like that. And over time, that's changed, and over time, the younger generation have gone onto the internet, and I think what has happened is there's been a change of tactics by politicians that they want to talk to the echo chamber rather than reality, because
they just keep the base sweet, and then they will get enough to get over the line.
Over the line.
And what does it look like, Andy? Because I see the results of people who spend their lives being lied to and loving it. I see the results of that, but I don't see the process. So what does the process look like? I've seen some of the Facebook stuff. I've seen some of the Cambridge Analytica stuff. I've got the head of the army, the chief of the defence staff, warning that the Russians are doing exactly what you describe, and the people that they're doing it to furiously denying that anyone's ever manipulated them into anything, and everything that they believe is God's honest truth. So what would it look like if I was in this environment?
Well, I mean, let's take a different situation. Let's look at the flat earthers and what happened with them.
Yes.
They got given an idea, and then I had a friend who was kind of looking into that, and he showed me videos, and all these videos started off with you can't trust this authority, and and there's a world conspiracy and all that, and then after that they hit you with the thing that they want you to believe.
Everyone else is fraudulent. Everyone else is fraudulent. Everyone else is part of
everyone else is fraudulent.
Right.
So that government report that's been exposed today, it won't make a difference to people who are kind of caught in this bad information trap that they get stuck in, because they're ardent Remainers, they're the establishment, they're trying to rule us, they're trying to not let us have what we want.
As long as you don't examine that position too closely, as long as you don't ask too many questions, you can sustain that position. But one of the abiding mysteries, of course, of this programme is how people can arrive on national radio so completely confident of their position, only to feel it fall apart beneath their feet within moments. And I think Andy's just provided the easiest answer yet, the best answer yet to that particular mystery. So, again, if you're questioning my analysis, then where is Boris Johnson getting the evidence from for his claim that there won't be any checks? We know where the Treasury is getting its evidence from. So where is Boris Johnson getting his evidence from for his, quotes, claim, end quotes? Oh, boy, I'm enjoying this. That's the weirdest thing. And you're not enjoying it, James. That's fake news, writes Andrew in Cardiff. I know what you mean, Andrew, but I promise you I am. Why? I do not know. I suppose you just really like trying to work stuff out, and the more complicated things are, the more enjoyable the process can be, up to the point where you fail to work it all out, and that presumably is the point where you stop enjoying things. Thankfully, I still get paid. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. What is going on? How do we get out of this rabbit hole? It seems to me, for about the gazillionth time, that we've reached a very, very important milestone, a milestone which would, under any normal pre-Brexit circumstances, have constituted a cataclysmic crisis for the Conservative Party. Namely, the fact that their own Treasury report has directly and completely contradicted spurious claims made by their own Prime Minister. I mean, this is a smoking gun. But I don't think it is going to change anything. And I don't really get it. Except for the slightly lazy observation that because Brexit was built on lies and unaccountability, doubling down on lies and unaccountability makes electoral sense. But surely, I mean, I can't spend my entire life saying, surely now you've woken up. And I fully appreciate that waking up to what has gone on in this country as a result of the Vote Leave campaign does not mean that you will have fallen in love overnight with Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, that's another scale, another layer of dismay. That rock and a hard place analysis. And then Joe Swinson on with Nick this morning, who seemed perfectly pleasant, but I've got more inspiring furniture at home. So how do we get out of the rabbit hole? I genuinely don't know. I thought I knew when I wrote my last book, and I suggested live fact-checking in interviews. I suggested repeatedly reminding senior politicians of words that they have previously said. I suggested not interviewing politicians who won't expose themselves to full scrutiny, but that would be like what has not happened in America, where you know, no one would give Donald Trump airtime if he bans people from the White House press conferences. Nobody should give Boris Johnson airtime if he won't expose himself to scrutiny at the highest levels. You know? But you can't do that. I mean, who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? Oh, we'll offer you an interview. The Prime Minister, no, I'm going to turn it down unless you ensure that he does Channel 4. No one's going to do that. That's why I have a radio show, not a radio station. Because I would do it, and I'd be an idiot commercially. So how do we get out of it? 0345 606 0973. And if you are still thinking, oh, good old, like our friend the PE consultant, if you are still somehow celebrating all this, can you tell me a little bit about yourself that will perhaps help the rest of us be a bit less condescending to you? Because right now, I can't imagine how stupid you would have to be down that particular path. And I don't like thinking like that about you. So, you know, here is the Treasury directly contradicting the Prime Minister on the Brexit that he is building his entire election campaign on. So the entire election campaign is built upon a lie. How do I know? The Treasury just told me. And now you're listening to me saying, no, it isn't. Shut up, James. No, it isn't. Actually, I don't know why I did a costive accent there. You could be very, very posh. No, it isn't. Talk me through how you end up there or how you can stay there. Here's the why would the Treasury secretly publish something? I don't know. Darren is in Woking. Darren, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I was looking at how we got into the rabbit hole because somehow that's slightly easier than how we get out of it, and they're both pretty difficult. But yes. I actually wonder, and I don't know if this is my age, so I'm 36, so I don't know if this is because I grew up majority under a sort of new Labour government, but I wonder if this is the coming of age of the spin doctor, and I obviously refer to Alistair Campbell. Now...
as in the ball he set rolling has delivered what we now see.
Yes, because what I think spin is about is testing boundaries of exaggeration.
Yes.
And as you test those boundaries and get away with more and more, you can exaggerate more and more. And one could argue that you end up in a place where you can just carry out barefaced lies. And
now, Alistair Campbell would furiously reject this, at which point you would say weapons of mass destruction, and he...
No, I would...
oh, OK.
Sorry, I was a big New Labour supporter, and weapons of mass destruction, obviously, is the dodgy dossier and everything is what it is, but I was a big New Labour supporter, and generally to the left, but I'm also a Brexiter as well, as we've spoken before. So I wouldn't necessarily go back on the cliches of weapons of mass destruction and all of that. But I think it's not about. I'm not attacking him as an individual. It's a process that there hasn't ever been boundaries set to. So if you let your kid get away with more and more every day, you go from a place where things are a bit naughty to all of a sudden your house is being turned upside down and parents are getting hit by their 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, like I know this is going to be dodgy saying this to you. You might rip me apart, but when you look at the 350 million on the side of the bus, there was one word, in my opinion, that was wrong with that, and it was the word "send."
Right.
We send 350 million to the EU. We don't. We send 150, 160. But, we could go over old ground and debate that as well. But
that's not.
Yeah, and that is the spin. Now,
well, no, hang on. You can't be. The problem can't be with the word "send" if the numbers are wrong, mate.
Well, because I think it was designed from what I've read, Tim Shipman's book, but the Uncivil War, is it Brexit, the Uncivil War, whatever it was. Oh no, sorry, I'm confusing the two.
Don't worry, but I'm not splitting hairs. I'm just pointing out that the number wasn't true. So the problem with the bus was not the word "send."
No, if it said no, you are right.
And then the other bit of it. No, hang on, because this is quite dangerous what you've just said. Because the other bit of it that was missing was the implied suggestion that we would somehow be better off, gross, as a result of not paying our membership fees to the European Union, where the government's own economic analyses, this government, the one led by Boris Johnson, the man that ran Vote Leave, every single scenario sees economic damage. The only argument is about how much. So we are going to be worse off. And that bus not only got the number wrong, and under your analysis the word "send" wrong, but the implied suggestion that we would have money to spare as a result of leaving the European Union was a massive lie. So, anyway, back to the bus.
They get away with it.
Well, you fell for it.
The implied suggestion.
You fell for it.
No. I don't know. I mean, you speak to hundreds and hundreds of people. I genuinely, to this day, would say I didn't fall for 80% of it, and my reasons for voting Leave were very narrow. And I don't believe that we need straight. We're never, we're going to have straight bananas instead of bendy bananas. I don't necessarily believe freedom of movement is terrible for our country, and immigration is what's caused the problem.
But you gave your vote to the people that told all those lies.
I gave my vote to the cause of Leave.
No, you gave your vote to the people who told those lies. You gave your vote to the people that painted that bus. You gave your vote to the people who claimed we could have our cake and eat it. Whether you like it or not, Darren, you did.
I understand why you're saying that. But
No. You did. Did you give your vote to the people who told the lies, or did you give your vote to the people who were on the other side?
Well, there were lies on both sides.
No, there weren't.
There were.
No, there weren't. There were forecasts and analyses that have not been borne out by events. Mark Carney has done more to undermine his own economic forecasts than any Bank of England governor in history.
Let me make this point, James. I agree
briefly.
with you.
Yeah, but you're still in denial, mate. You gave your vote to the liars.
You always say about Mark Carney on the morning of the referendum done everything he possibly could to break his own forecast. Yeah?
Yes.
Now that is true. But what he should have done to substantiate.
So he wasn't a liar, was he?
Vote, what he should have done, he spun it. He should have said before the vote, unless I do this on the morning of the referendum result, this is what it will lead to. And that is missed on both sides. And
but no, the whole point about a warning is that it's designed to stop people doing the stupid thing. You don't add on the end of the warning, by the way, if you do the stupid thing, don't worry, I'll look after you.
You don't add the truth, is what you're saying, John.
No, you don't add the possibility that people are going to ignore the warning. You ignored the warning, Darren. Don't get cross with him. At some point between now and Judgment Day, you're going to have to start getting cross with yourself. It's 11:13, and there, in a nutshell, is the problem. That's the choice. Darren's a decent fella, bright, not racist, didn't vote for bendy bananas, but he still, somewhere, clings to the notion that what he did in June of 2016 wasn't really stupid. And he's picking on the people that warned him that it was for not having told him more about what they would do to unpick the damage he's inflicted on his own country. Talking about a bus, saying that the problem with it was the word "send." The number was false. The idea that we'd be better off, which the bus was designed to inflate, was false. And don't take my word for it. Take the word of the government currently led by the man that led Vote Leave, the man who said that trading between Northern Ireland and Great Britain would be unfettered. The man whose Treasury has just concluded, well, no, it won't, pal. You see? It's bonkers. It's beyond bonkers. It's completely broken. It is precisely what Donald Trump described when he talked about being able to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. Because you're still cheering or booing according to the colour of your scarf, when in fact we're all on the same team. Just half the country doesn't realise it yet. And there is a clip of Boris Johnson giving a speech, I think today, actually, but I was about to play it to you because it appears to be not so much a racist dog whistle as a racist klaxon. And I was just about to embark upon a measured and magnificent monologue about how the big mistake the so-called liberal establishment has made is thinking that this stuff will put people off. There's a significant swathe of the country that lap it up, absolutely love it. So we sit here clutching our pearls going, oh my God, I can't believe what he said about Muslim women. And a significant swathe of people whose votes are worth exactly the same as yours go, I love it, I love what he said about the Muslim women. See? I don't think that's a particularly perspicacious insight. But I have just, as I poised to play you the clip, seen somebody else claiming that the word colour is not actually there, it's talent. So, should we have a listen and decide for ourselves? And then we'll crack on with the conversation without passing any judgment, unless it's really clear, because I've only read the transcript. I haven't actually listened to the clip. So we can do it together now. So we're looking for the phrase people of either colour or talent. Because if he said people of talent, Channel 4 have just dropped a fairly hefty clanger. Have a listen.
Every single one of our candidates has signed up to this deal. And they haven't been, dragooned, they haven't been lobotomised into doing it. They're doing it with absolutely voluntarily from all wings of opinion of our party. There's a huge spread of opinion. They all want to back this deal and get Brexit done. And it does everything that I think people want from Brexit. It allows us to take back control of our borders, our laws. We can do things differently, whether it's cutting VAT on tampons or legislating. Well, that's true. You can't do it at the moment under EU law. You can't do it, but we will be able to do it. We'll be able to do things like legislating to take away cruelty to animals at the moment, like banning the export of live animals, which goes on. Still, British people have campaigned against that for decades. We'll finally be able to do it. We'll have things like free ports around the country. We'll be able to do all sorts of things differently and better, including controlling our immigration system for the first time in decades. And that would be a good thing. I'm in favour of having people of colour come to this country, but I think we should have it democratically controlled and have it done that way. Now, all that we can do if we get Brexit done.
This is actually really helpful, because social media is going absolutely nuts, claiming that Boris Johnson has been explicitly racist about people of colour. I, as someone who routinely points out his dishonesties and deceptions, can now demonstrate to you that it's not about sides. I don't think he said people of colour. I think he said people of talent. I think that the Twitter mob have got this horribly wrong on this occasion. See how easy it is? Don't have to be 100% critical or 100% complimentary. You could be 100% honest. Have another listen to the specific phrase. He's been accused of having said people of colour should be democratically controlled. I don't think he said that.
I'm in favour of having people of colour come to this country, but I think we should have it democratically controlled and have it done that way. Now, all that we can do if we get Brexit done.
Right, nothing to see here. Everybody calm down. He did not say people of colour. Good grief. But we're back in the room. 22 minutes after 11. He did, however, say that there would be unfettered trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, something which everybody who understands even the vaguest issue rejects and rejected. It is not true. Under the terms of the withdrawal agreement, as it stands, we will not be retaining full regulatory alignment, which means that if Northern Ireland is staying in, then there will be checks in the Irish Sea. That's a fact. Boris Johnson continues to deny it publicly. And you don't care because... ... 03456060973. Paul's in Camden. Paul, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. You said your rabbit in the hat.
Hole.
It's a fallacy. And
hole.
the reason it's
rabbit in a hole, rabbit hole.
Because people don't vote on just one thing.
No.
The election is not done on just one lie. It's done on a whole raft of things. So, if I vote for Boris, I'm probably going to do, I do it and I know he's a liar. Vote for Corbyn and I know, guaranteed, my mortgage rates will go up. So you ask me what I'm going to choose. Practical. You're not going to choose mortgage rates going up. That's it. And I'd like to leave you with this.
But you're trusting the liar.
I'd like to leave you with this.
It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, Paul. If you're not prepared to indulge in a conversation, then you've called the wrong show. You're going to trust a liar, and you've somehow rationalised that to yourself because you think Jeremy Corbyn will cost you money.
Absolutely, and he's a liar.
No, that's fine. That's 23 after 11. What's the biggest lie Jeremy Corbyn's told, do you think? About, just say this week.
Can I just say one thing?
No, just answer my question. What's the biggest lie he's told this week?
Haven't a clue.
And there you are, tugging your forelock. John's in Ballymena. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, yeah. I just wanted to sort of generally speak more about the divide and how I see it.
Yeah.
I've kind of watched this now. You can say from Trump and Brexit that the divide and the narrative and the pushing and the biasness as well has been so overwhelming across the board that most people are just sick of that. Not so much sick of the politics; they're sick of all the biasness. And you know,
what do you mean by bias? I don't understand.
Well, to be fair, you've done a fine job of proving it this morning the way you speak.
Yes, go on. So what do you mean?
Truth, and your truth is only the truth, and that's it. And anyone else is a lie, and you're an idiot if you don't believe your truth.
So where are you getting your Treasury forecasts from? Because mine's from the Treasury.
No. You can get specific on one point.
Well, that's all we're talking about today.
How about speaking about the bigger truth?
No. How about you tell me where you're getting your predictions on what's going to happen to trade in Northern Ireland from? Because I'm getting mine from the Treasury.
How about this?
No, John, just tell me where you're getting your information from. Because I've told you where I get mine from.
Would you let me then?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Fill your boots.
Right, okay. I think the actual source of information has become so widespread now. Now, again...
That doesn't mean anything.
Sorry?
The source of information has become so widespread now. What does that mean?
Yeah. Via the internet and via the way people communicate globally
so where are you getting yours from? I'm getting my views on Northern Ireland Protocol, unfettered access to the UK internal market from the Treasury, John. So where are you getting yours from?
Let's take it broader. If you want
no, let's not. Just tell me where you're getting your information from.
No, because you can't do this. You're being overpowering.
I'm doing it now.
If you want to be more truthful...
Where are you getting your information from?
If we look at the actual state of Europe, the financial state of Europe...
Yes, but where are you getting your information from on this?
To look at.
Are you going to tell me, John?
About Brexit and Trump and he said, she said.
Here's the Treasury. Where are you getting yours from?
You push divide. You push a so-called educated and working class divide. And because
David's in Enfield. David, what's going on?
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that I do think with this election, these lies by whichever politician are essentially irrelevant because this is the Brexit election. People are still entrenched. They're still concerned about the same things that they were in 2016. They're concerned about the access to schools, access to housing, the problems with the NHS, and the problem that when they walk down their high street, they don't understand the language that's being spoken. That's not a racist issue. That is about this election. It's a Brexit election, and that's what people are still voting on.
And how are they going to change the languages people speak as a result of the election result?
Well, it's a question of obviously controlling immigration, and this. No,
but the people who are speaking the foreign languages now, what's going to happen to them after the election result?
Well, those people have been given the right to stay in this country, which is quite right.
You're just going to make them talk different languages then, are you?
No, all I'm saying is that, well, if you let me finish, what I'm saying...
I'd like you to start.
If you come to this country...
Yes, but they're already here, and you're saying my vote is hinging upon the number of people talking foreign languages. How is that going to change as a result of how you vote?
Well, I'm going to tell you.
Good.
It's about integration into our society.
Yes, but how is that going to change as a result of your vote? Why are people going to start speaking different languages as a result of your vote, David? Just talk me through the logic.
The logic is that we cut down on the immigration. Those people that are currently here...
But they're currently speaking French in Enfield. What will they speak
after you get what you want on election day? What language will they speak afterwards?
You're missing the point. It's about integration.
Quite possibly, but if you could just answer the question. You said but people don't like hearing foreign languages as they make their way down the street. After you voted, what languages will those people be speaking?
If they choose to carry on speaking those languages, they'll carry on to do that.
So your vote would be wasted then?
Into the society.
Your vote would be wasted then?
It's a question of we are where we are with the immigration.
Yes.
I'm not saying that any of these people should be sent back. What I'm saying is you deal with it.
You realise you're talking about European people.
Well, not just European, it's the rest of the world.
No, we haven't voted to leave the rest of the world. We've only voted to leave the European Union.
Yes, that's right. And you have to start.
And so the morning after you've cast your vote because you don't like all the foreign languages being spoken in Enfield, what do you think is going to change?
What is going to change is not going to have as many people come in. Boris has said he's going to restrict immigration.
But today's entire programme is built upon the fact that Boris Johnson routinely says things that are not true. So why do you believe that bit, do you think?
Well, why should I believe any politician when Corbyn
don't believe the politician, believe the Treasury. But you're telling me that you do believe Boris Johnson, and then in the next sentence you said, why should I believe any politician? That was my question. Why do you believe him on the immigration stuff when he has been shown to be mistaken, to be generous, or deceitful, to be less generous on so many other issues? What is it about the immigration pledge that somehow floats your boat, David?
Because you put them side by side, Corbyn and...
Not talking about Corbyn, talking about you and Boris Johnson, mate. And foreigners speaking languages.
As a country, we're talking about who we're going to vote for in this election.
Yes.
Do I think Corbyn will control...
No. Why do you believe Johnson on this one issue when he's been shown to be mistaken on pretty much every other one? And here you are on national radio cheering for him because...
Because what Johnson understands, unlike Corbyn, Johnson does understand what 2016 was about. He does understand,
and it was about people speaking foreign languages.
That was part of it, very much.
What else was it? What else was it about?
It was about the fact that people haven't got access to the NHS. They haven't got the housing they want.
And the fact that he's lied about hospitals? The fact that he's lied about hospitals?
8 million more people than there were 10 years ago.
But most of them speak English, David. I thought it was only the ones speaking foreign languages you had a problem with.
That's very good. If people
it's brilliant, isn't it? It's 11:30. Permission to hate. That's probably the simplest way to describe what has happened to much of Western politics in the last 3 or 4 years, and we should probably thank David in Enfield for his honesty. Lots of people pretend Brexit was about something other than foreign people speaking their foreign languages. Of course it wasn't. Maybe for some people, slightly sort of sophisticated mercantile theories. There is a powerful intellectual argument about judicial supremacy, but the idea that carried 17 million people through the polling booths is, well, almost as funny as the reverse ferret being undertaken by people who... I'm 99% certain he says people are talent. Let's listen one more time, because this is... We've put the clip out of me proving that Boris Johnson never said people of colour, so I hope we don't have to do a retreat. But I really love this moment for reasons that I explained to you, because I suspect perhaps the last 3 callers would all subscribe to the school of thought that you have to be 100% pro or 100% anti. You know, where are you getting your information from is a question that people aren't prepared to answer, in which case they will exhaust my reserves of politeness. Where are you getting the information from to counter what the Treasury has published with regard to Northern Ireland? But Boris Johnson is being unfairly accused of racism this morning, and it's really easy for someone who routinely and accurately points out the racist things that he's done, it's really easy to admit that. So the monologue I was working up in my mind would have been about how saying stuff like that, if he had said people of colour coming into the country need to be democratically controlled, I don't think it would be a massive reach to suggest that some of the voices you've heard in the last 10 minutes, but not mine, would actually love that. So my point was going to be Boris Johnson will get castigated for this, but people up and down the country will be quietly delighted that he has apparently said something really, really racist. But he didn't say it. Full stop, bottom line. Well, not full stop. I'm pretty sure he didn't say it.
I'm in favour of having people of talent come to this country, but I think we should have it democratically controlled and be
obviously talent, lads.
Done that way. Now, all that
talent.
we can do,
right, once more from the top, Keith.
I'm in favour of having people of talent come to this country, but I think we should have it democratically controlled and have it done that way. Now, all that
people of talent. It's people of talent. There it is. 11:37 is the time. If division is the topic of conversation, then I agree. The country is divided between people who like being lied to and people who don't. Doesn't matter who's telling the lies. The lies are the issue, not the identity of the liar. It's why I was very interested to hear whether our friend earlier could tell me about Jeremy Corbyn's most blatant lies this week, or this month, or this election campaign. But he couldn't. Doesn't mean you couldn't. Veronica is in Sutton. Veronica, what made you pick up the phone?
It's actually about the caller you just talked about when you asked me the question about has Jeremy Corbyn said any lies. I'm definitely not a huge Corbyn fan by any stretch of the imagination, and I should be voting Conservatives because I'm in the high income bracket. I send my son to a private school and I have a second home. So if Labour come to power, I'm going to be significantly...
Specific issues, but we can talk about the national picture and on the national scale, the key reason why I would like Labour to win is that they will. I even though I don't like him for many reasons, I know that he will give the country a second choice on the second referendum, and I'm an ardent Remainer. So the country will have that second choice. And if I have to take the hit for the next 5 years and be out of pocket, and we've done the math, we've sat down with less holidays, a lot of blah, 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 blah. Will it be a silver... I hear you, and I mean, obviously, I've long subscribed to the school of thought that the real test of a principle is whether it actually harms you, but helps others, and I think you'll be comfortable filed in that particular pigeonhole. Can I ask you a vaguely personal question?
Yeah.
Vaguely. You don't need to sound so querulous.
Okay.
Will it be a silver lining if it doesn't go the way you want, and you wake up and remember that your financial situation will probably be enhanced by a victory?
No,
not at all.
I'll be sickened. I'm
wondering whether or not if because I'm unlike you.
No.
I don't really have much of a repository for anything, but I do find the idea that people who are well above average earnings generally do quite well out of Conservative government. So
yeah, no, I'm appalled by it. Fair enough. It's the food banks, there's the lack of social care, the impact on our NHS, the waiting. I mean, I see it, and also, I'd be appalled, and even issues around knife crime. There's lack of investment in youth centres and after-school clubs. It's all been cut back.
Fair enough.
And although I'm in a fortunate position with my own son, I see it in the environment where I live, and it's appalling.
Fair enough. There is no guarantees that wherever you end up voting or whoever ends up in government will deliver what you want, but you're pretty clear about who you don't want to be charged with that task. 11:40 is the time. The question of how we get out of the rabbit hole is one which has probably been answered unintentionally this morning, and the answer is you can't get out of the rabbit hole while half the country doesn't realise they're in it. That's a challenge, perhaps, for Veronica's son's generation. Alex is in Leeds. Alex, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Alex.
I'm just speaking to your producers, and I think for me, where we are today is a logical conclusion of 50 years of culture wars, and it also tied in with your phone in the other day about Donald Trump, Freudian slip there.
It was very Freudian, wasn't it?
Donald Trump, does it matter whether he lies or even know why he lies? So if you allow me very, very quickly...
I will do. Just on the issue of truth, Channel 4 News have just tweeted saying, Boris Johnson says people of talent, not people of colour. Our earlier tweet was a mistake. We misheard and we apologise.
Well, that's good to hear.
Isn't it?
Now, you often say, I may not get a Ray Liotta, but you say, what makes me qualified? So my degree in philosophy, politics and sociology, and the fact that I'm an ardent, observer of politics for how many years, I think gives some credence to what I'm about to say. So I'm going to throw some words out like epistemology and empiricism, and the fact that, understanding truth, gaining truth, having shared truths used to matter.
But if we go back to the presidential election of 1968, Richard Nixon, Lee Atwater, and the Southern strategy, where they needed to get votes in the South from Southern Democrats. This was when we saw the emergence and the use of wedge issues and dog whistles to try and get, votes from white racists. I can say that. This is all evidence. So they used words in terms like busing, when they used to bus black students into white areas to go to school where there was still segregation. The use of the word states' rights, and then latterly, and we see this still in American presidential elections, and how the use of Roe versus Wade and abortion and First Amendment and the coming for our guns and all the rest of it. And if you remember Ronald Reagan, I think in one of the elections in the 80s, where, the phrase was literally, government isn't the solution, government's the problem. And the whole thing about undermining institutions, undermining the courts
to what end? To what end, Alex? Because I was about to pick you up on saying 50 years of culture wars, but I'm quite glad I didn't, because you really are going back in the day.
No, but I'll bring it up today.
No, you don't need to. I just wonder what's the end game? Because oddly, of course, Roger Stone was around, wasn't he, working with Richard Nixon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Look, it's all about...
I'm not challenging you. I'm seeking to learn from you. I know I sound a bit testy sometimes, but I'm in a wonderful mood today. I'm at one with the universe. Less drama, more karma, Alex.
What it's about is... And it's about gaining power and retaining power. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
And there's not both sides. It's not that all the left and the liberals do it as well. This is very much a right-wing project, yeah? And, if I bring it to a UK analysis...
The examples you've used it is. I was racking my brains then to try and think of one that wasn't.
And I'll bring it to a UK analysis, right? So, long may he rest in peace, the cultural professor, Stuart Hall. He wrote about Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives, and again, it's these coded messages, these dog whistles of, being swamped by immigrants, and the concept of the black mugger. Now,
yes.
There's no such thing as mugging. The offence is robbery, but it's a picture that this created in the public consciousness in the UK. And then, as you said again, I think it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, you were talking about, how single mothers were demonised, and we had all that stuff, in the 80s, again, to drive
I don't know that I should say this, because my boss is in the next room, and I know that for once he's actually listening, but do you think you possibly listen to this programme a bit too much, Alex?
Is that possible?
That's a correct answer. Carry on.
And then you had Michael Howard in the 2005 general election with the use of, Linton Crosby, and the phrase was, "Are you thinking what we're thinking?"
Yes.
So it's a drip, 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 drip.
So it's always race then, under your analysis?
No, it's not always race, but it's the thing about, Michael Gove, who needs experts? It's just to plant enough doubt and scepticism so that okay, well, you don't have to believe us, but can you really believe them as well? You just have to start doubting everything. So
permission to hate coupled with the abnegation of objectivity or expertise.
And this, we've talked about this before, about cognitive dissonance and the ability to hold...
Yes, but you're not hearing cognitive dissonance today. I mean, we had a nice hat-trick of callers, and it wasn't cognitive dissonance, it was ignorant fury that we heard there.
Well, let me say this.
Yes.
When you have people like Dominic Raab and Priti Patel and Kwasi Kwarteng and Jeremy Hunt and others who have in the past advocated, small state liberalism, conservatism, free markets, and obviously we were talking about in relation to the NHS, but it could be anything else. And when Dominic Raab gets called out, I think it was by Matthew Bolton, to say, but you've authored a report or a pamphlet or whatever.
Yes.
And Dominic Raab's saying, no, I didn't.
And he did.
It's because it doesn't matter anymore.
He didn't quite say that he hadn't written the pamphlet. He sort of, well, I don't know, why have you put me in this position? I think he was trying to disown its contents. He didn't deny that he'd written it. He denied that he meant it or something. I don't know. Don't make me do this, Alex. Don't make me do Dominic Raab's retrospective PR. Please don't make me do this. But everything else you said is terrifyingly plausible, stroke almost certainly correct. Where we have not moved a millimetre, you could argue, since June 2016. Why? I don't know. I do think that the best intentions of people like me, when we bent over backwards to defend Brexit voters who weren't racist, was, in retrospect, possibly a mistake. Because once you strip away everything else, what is left? Conversations about people speaking foreign in Enfield, which is where we started, actually. You know, if you see the trajectory of this programme, the infamy or the fame that it's achieved is built upon talking to people who say stuff like that and can't quite believe it when they're asked to account for themselves. So it's a very strange old business. And today, we weren't even supposed to be talking about the things that we were ended up talking about. We were supposed to be talking about Boris Johnson's continuing refusal to be interviewed by Julie Etchingham and Andrew Neil, and most pertinently by Andrew Neil at the BBC, because he's interviewed everybody else. And we didn't. We very nearly ended up speaking about Boris Johnson being massively racist, but it turned out he hadn't been massively racist. Matthew Thompson is here to just talk us through the political developments of the day. Good luck.
The most interesting thing to bring to your attention, James, is that in the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes, Boris Johnson has been speaking at the unveiling of a new election poster in Kent. And he was asked about this dossier that the Labour Party have revealed this morning, which seems to go directly against everything he said about what his deal means for Northern Ireland. You'll remember, of course, that Boris Johnson has repeatedly claimed that his deal does not put any barriers up in the Irish Sea, that will not be any checks either west-east or east-west between Great Britain and Northern Ireland under his deal. Now, what the Labour Party did this morning is they unveiled a document from civil service, impartial civil service analysis, which you have in your hands.
I do, like Neville Chamberlain.
From the Treasury, you have the document in your hand, and it says precisely what we already knew, that there will indeed be checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland of varying degrees. And look, we'd be the first to admit that they aren't the same as having a full customs border necessarily, but there would be a series of checks, export declarations, and all manner of things that do count in the eyes of many people, and particularly, let's remember, unionists in Northern Ireland, as checks. Now, we have that document in our hands. That was then put to him being Boris Johnson, yes, at this speech in Kent about 10 minutes ago. Listen to his response.
They should believe exactly what I say, which is there will be no checks on goods going from GB to NI, from NI to GB, because we are going to come out of the EU whole and entire, and that was the objective that we secured. And by the way, it is a vast improvement on the original proposal, which would indeed have carved out Northern Ireland and kept it in the EU for all sorts of purposes, and we're able to do a fantastic deal for our country. And now is the time to seize it. And if there are any, by the way, one of the great benefits of the deal that we've done is if there's any particular that the people of Northern Ireland don't like, then of course they are entitled. All those provisions automatically elapse in 4 years' time. But if there's anything that they don't like, then they can vote to stay in alignment with the EU for those purposes. But it is a fantastic deal that allows us to get out as a whole country and move on.
Now, there's a few things, James, to say about that. The first is this extraordinary insistence that in spite of the evidence that you have in your hands before you, in spite of, and let me remind you, in spite of acknowledgements from Stephen Barclay, the Brexit Secretary, from Julian Smith, the Northern Ireland Secretary, who all, in front of committees in the House of Commons, have confirmed what we know, that there will indeed be checks, Boris Johnson continues to insist that there will not be checks. And it's an extraordinary pattern of behaviour. You'll remember, of course, the famous 31st of October, we are leaving assertions.
I'll die in a ditch, he was supposed to, wasn't he?
But it's an extraordinary pattern of behaviour that doesn't really appear to bear any consequences.
Well, that is the rabbit hole, as I describe it, is the absence of consequences, because, here we are again. Even to the extent that the BBC's political editor was not poo-pooing it, but almost missed the point of this not being new, as you've just reminded us. The point here, the story, such as it is the Prime Minister's continual repetition of things demonstrably not true. Today, according to, as you remind us, the impartial civil servants at Her Majesty's Treasury responsible for simply preparing the ground
and members
for
of his own government.
And members of his own cabinet.
And
You're
this,
laughing
I mean, this
because the alternative is to howl at the moon, I think.
And I think we can get carried away. Obviously, we're in an election campaign, and people will be thinking, listening to my reporting of this, saying, "Oh, you're having a go at Boris Johnson," but I'm really not. I mean, it's up to us to report the facts as we see them, and these are the facts. And I think what's also interesting is you're starting to get some response from Northern Ireland on this, and particularly what's interesting is the response from unionism. So the Ulster Unionist Party leader Steve Aiken has put out a statement on these documents this morning, and says that he says that the material that Corbyn has revealed shows that there would be ruinous consequences for Northern Ireland. The fact that it identifies Northern Ireland's small and medium enterprises would be likely to struggle to bear the cost should set alarm bells ringing.
98% of exporters NI to GB are small and medium-sized enterprises.
And he says it would puts Northern Ireland on the brink, in his words, of being torn away from our biggest market with ruinous consequences. And this is very much, unionism is united on this. And I thought what was interesting in what Boris Johnson said there was, this is much better than the original deal. Now, that's true if you believe the original deal to be the Northern Ireland-only backstop, which was the first thing that the EU offered. But then the reason Theresa May negotiated the deal she did was because that was totally unacceptable. Do you remember? No British Prime Minister could accept.
Boris Johnson said that as well as Theresa May.
Boris Johnson said it in front of the DUP conference last year in 2018.
But we're back again, you see. And I know that you're a proper journalist, so you won't join me on my flights of fancy and my speculative forays. But how do people listening to this rationalise? I mean, we heard from one caller who is worried about his mortgage, so he doesn't care about the lies. But that can't be too representative of the bigger picture. It's genuinely astonishing what you're saying, and I'm here afresh, reeling in shock at stuff I already knew, because when you see someone else responding to it with this utter disconnect between actions and consequences, you just wonder where it ends, where it leads. It's insane.
And it may be, we've got to be fair to the Conservatives and Boris Johnson. It may be that he has a rabbit in the hat, buried deep in a hat somewhere that no one else can quite fathom, that means that there won't be checks.
This is what we call the flesh-coloured body stocking school of political analysis. It may well be that the Emperor is wearing a flesh-coloured body stocking, but he looks naked to me.
But this was the analysis that went around, of course, over do you remember the letters, of course, that were going to be sent to the EU, and we were assured that the letters wouldn't be sent.
4D chess.
And then the letters were sent, and everyone tied themselves in knots, thinking, there's some clever ruse that they've got under their
just wasn't.
thumbs. And there wasn't. Now, the past performance is no guarantee of future returns, as they say. So it might be the case that this time they do know something we don't. But on the basis of the available evidence, there will be checks in Northern Ireland. Now, the final thing I want to say about that speech that he said, just thinking about it again from a unionist perspective, because this is unionism is united in its opposition to this. He mentioned there would be a 4-year revision process. That is absolutely true. The problem is unionism feels like it would be trapped because it could potentially be outvoted by nationalism, who thinks this is great because, it's the thin end of the wedge from a unionist perspective towards a united Ireland. So unionism doesn't believe that it has a get-out-of-jail clause at the end of 4 years whatsoever.
And Boris Johnson's response is to say, no, just believe me, folks.
More or less.
In a nutshell. Matthew Thompson, many thanks indeed. It's 12 noon. And that will be, I think, the big online debate and brouhaha today will be a bit like, what was it, Yanni and, what was the other thing? Yeah, Laurel, Yanni and Laurel. Do you remember that? Did you hear Yanni or Laurel? And then there was that dress that was different colours to different people. Do you remember that as well? A bit like that. There's still a debate, but I'm 99.999 recurring % certain that Channel 4 have done the right thing by taking down that video in which they had accused Boris Johnson of talking about people of colour needing to be democratically controlled when he says people of talent. But we will move on. I'm Incorrigible is, I suspect, about to become mildly famous because he's found a clip of Boris Johnson using the phrase people of talent from the end of last month. So it is a phrase that Boris Johnson has issued. The sceptics out there still thinking that he was explicitly racist, relying upon the argument that it's an unfamiliar phrase, but there he is. I'm just going to... Do you want to see... Should we do this live? Should we do something new? I'm going to tweet this. This should settle things. And then, there you go. Ooh, never done that before. How exciting.